Hello and welcome to chapter 19. I hope you weren't too terrified by Dracula manifesting in mist form there at the start of the video. But we will press on, and we have a reference to, do you remember in the last chapter where Mina was demoted basically to secretary work effectively in the meeting? I am so glad that she consented to hold back and let us men do the work when they go and raid Dracula's base at Carfax Abbey. Well, there you go. So there's another one of these elements where more traditional gender roles here in the novel. Then, contrastingly, we have reference here to her energy and brains and foresight. The whole story is put together in such a way so it's fictionally her skills that we've got the whole record of the Dracula case. So carrying on, we have Quincy talking to Dr. Seward, and they're talking about Renfield. See, Jack, if that man wasn't attempting a bluff, he is about the sanest lunatic I ever saw. I'm not sure, but I believe that he had some serious purpose, and if he had, it was pretty rough on him not to get a chance. So some ambiguity here about Renfield and Quincy, showing some insight there. Remember from last chapter as well. Friend John, says Dr. Van Helsing, you know more of lunatics than I do, and I'm glad of it, for I fear that if I had been me to decide, I would before that last hysterical outburst have given him free. But we live and learn, and in our present task we must take no chance, as my friend Quincy would say. All is best as they are. So the Stoker seems to expect us to suspend our disbelief here that there's no real suspicion about Renfield. It seems pretty obvious though, doesn't it, really? I would dare to venture. Dr. Seward has his suspicions, but he seems so mixed up with the Count in an indexy kind of way. That's quite an informal, colloquial usage there, isn't it? But I'm afraid of doing anything wrong by helping his fads. So I suppose if we're being really fair, the perspective of the characters on Dracula means that, sorry, perspective of characters on Dracula, or perspectives of characters on Renfield means that, you know, maybe it's easy for us as readers to see it, their characters within the story themselves. Maybe it's less obvious if we're being generous. But look at this. Besides, he called the Count Lord and Master. Come on, guys, come on. That horrid thing has the wolves and rats and his own kind to help him, so I suppose he isn't above trying to use respectable lunatics. So there seems to be some unfamiliar collocation there, isn't it? Respectable lunatic. There's some recognition of suspected connections to Dracula, but they don't really seem to act on it properly or quickly enough. But it does seem very obvious to us. But I suppose it's all dramatic irony, and it's all more fuel for our analysis, really, isn't it? We have reiteration here about how strong he is, but also how dangerous he is as well, because they can possibly restrain him. But of course, Dracula can physically hurt and kill them. But you can't hurt and kill Dracula through normal means. I'd highlighted small electric lamps because that's another one. Actually, also revolver. Didn't really think of that before, but looking at that, that's quite modern technology, really. We're so used to thinking of these things, but of course that would be a recent novelty as an invention, and I believe revolvers would be fairly new as well, if you think of the stereotypical cowboy western one. Reference to sacred wafer as well, which is another religious reference there as well. We've had plenty of those. And remember, Van Helsing is a Catholic background, and he's got this papal indulgence, and he can use the communion wafers outside of normal church services in his fight against the undead. And just to further reinforce what I said about Van Helsing and his religious background, he says here in Latin, In manus tuis, domine. Where two lightsabers appear then. Spooky. But further reinforcing his Catholic background, and he must have some kind of religious instruction in his background as well. Seems to be, I would assume. I mean, in God's hands, I should say as well, or in your hands, God. Actually, what it means literally. Then we have, oh dear, here they go again, as they go into Dracula's lair, Carfax Abbey. Another thing that seems a bit obvious to us as readers, but I could not for my life get away from the feeling that there was someone else amongst us. Funny that, isn't it? This is Jonathan Harker. I suppose it was a recollection so powerfully brought home to me by the grim surroundings of that terrible experience in Transylvania. So we have an anaphoric reference there back to the first couple of chapters of the novel. And it is quite similar actually to all those sections, all the dust and everything, and the way that it's described. And it connects back to those chapters. And Jonathan Harker's changed a lot. He was brave then, but he was really scared. He's still scared now, but he's able to join in the fight against Dracula. Dracula's home is very smelly. It's basically my simplified version of that there. But yeah, because of the stench of death, it seemed as though corruption had become itself corrupt. Bit of hyperbole there. So it smells really bad. But there's some more fun quotations you could take from that bit if you wanted to. But they're looking for these boxes. Oh dear, there are only 29 left out of the 50. Oh no. Oh dear, look, here he goes again. Somewhere looking out from the shadow, I seem to see the highlights of the Count's evil face, the ridge of the nose, the red eyes, the red lips, the awful pallor. It was only for a moment, for as Lord Godalming said, I thought I saw a face, but it was only the shadows. Oh no, they're all seeing him. Come on, guys. You know you're up against a supernatural enemy. It's pretty obvious. But again, it's all dramatic irony. It's all meant to be suspense. This is meant to be very scary, very tense. Sequence is full of suspense. And the idea is we don't know what's going to happen to these characters. And the idea is that we think, oh no, Dracula's there. Anything could happen. Lord Godalming has a secret weapon because he whips out his little whistle and summons some little dogs. He's got some terriers who come in to get rid of all the rats that are coming in, if you remember this bit. Because Dracula's got an affinity for... how does Dr. Van Helsing describe it? Like the Mina creatures or something like that. Not Mina, but Mina, as in M-E-N. I can't even spell it. M-E-A-N-E-R, Mina creatures. So an affinity with spooky animals, basically. And the rats were multiplying in thousands. We moved out. So again, it's a staple of the horror genre as well, isn't it? Thinking about rats associated with decay, associated with death and disease, and they're unpleasant. You might be a big rat fan, of course. I may be offending you. But we have the dogs, basically terriers, ratters, aren't they? So they like to go through, they're quite happy to go through all of the rats here. The dogs do get a bit spooked out though, so it does suggest that, again, if you look carefully, it's suggesting that Dracula is present in some way. But again, for the readers, as you're realising there's something going on here, spooky going on here, what Stoker does is that we have step has been this. Oh, sorry, I'll start again. More than all, I do rejoice that this, our first and perhaps our most difficult and dangerous step, has been accomplished without the bringing thereunto of our most sweet Madam Mina, or troubling her waking or sleeping thoughts with sights and sounds and smells of horror which you might never forget. So again, because she's a woman, they don't want to scare her, you see. So, oh dear, hang on a minute. It's like a classic horror film thing, isn't it? I'm glad nothing bad could happen to Mina. Dun dun dun. It's this classic horror trope, really. We've got the vulnerable female character on her own. Van Helsing actually returns to these chess metaphors several times in the novel, even though I didn't highlight it, so sorry about that. Then again we have more dramatic irony because, oh look, when Jonathan Harker goes back to join her, she looks paler than usual as she's in bed. Okay, here we go. And then in the morning, I was awake before her and had to call 2 or 3 times before she awoke. Indeed, she was so sound asleep that for a few seconds she did not recognise me, but looked at me with a sort of blank terror, as one looks who has been waked out of a bad dream. Oh dear, this is Lucy Mark II, isn't it? They really should, or Jonathan Harker, he's meant to be up to speed with all of this Dracula case. You think he might notice, mightn't he, and have some concern. I thought, oh, where was Dracula while we were at the abbey? Okay, but again, dramatic irony, so we're giving some not so subtle clues here of what's happening. Then we have a conversation about Renfield again, and this is almost humorous actually. When our sane and learned lunatic made that very statement of how he used to consume life, his mouth was actually nauseous with the flies and spiders which he had eaten just before Mrs. Harker entered the room. So I think this is, again, it's ironic, it's meant to be slightly humorous, but I think it's also a way of explaining why the main characters here don't really join the dots with Renfield and don't really trust what he's saying, because he's a lunatic and you can't trust what he's saying because he says one thing and he actually does another. So I think that's Stoker trying to reinforce that idea there. I keep saying reinforce a lot today, so I'm sorry if you're bored of hearing the word reinforce. I apologise, and I will try and think of a replacement. Then we've got a bit of abuse here from Renfield for Van Helsing. So he calls him damn old thick-headed Dutchman. I've lost my pointer. Why is my pointer not working? I will work that out on the pause and work it out. Okay, that should be fixed. Sorry about that. Anyway, then I haven't got anything highlighted here really. I don't think I had anything too much to add to this. Apart from we go to Mina Harker's journal, and this is an interesting sequence actually as well. And again, even though she's really clever, doesn't seem to be quite fully aware of what's going on here. So this bit is all about her kind of regretting what happened with Lucy and blaming herself there as well. But this is the bit I'm really interested in, which is, well, it turns out that Mina is sleeping above where Renfield is. This is a really great idea, isn't it, Dr. Seward? Anyway, but she looks out across the lawn and she sees not a thing seemed to be stirring, but all to be grim and fixed as death or fate, so that a thin streak of white mist that crept with almost imperceptible slowness across the grass towards the house seemed to have a sentience and a vitality of its own. Okay. Do you remember in the last chapter when they're all at a meeting and Van Helsing explains all the powers of Dracula? Well, one of those powers was to be able to turn into a mist. So Mina doesn't seem to think that there's anything too odd about this. The mist was spreading and was now close up to the house. I could see it lying against the wall, as though it was stealing up the windows. It's a sentient mist because it's Dracula, of course. Then she's distracted by some sound of Renfield being overpowered below. There's some kind of struggle with him. But she also talks about having this strange dream. So she does go to sleep, but I thought that I was asleep. And this is all good for the theme of liminality, a great one for crossing boundaries, isn't it? When you think about sleeping and being awake and dreaming, and when you're dreaming you think you're awake, and then all of those mixed feelings there. So it's a really good one for that one. I thought that I was asleep and waited for Jonathan to come back. I was very anxious about him and I was powerless to act. My feet and my hands and my brain were weighted so that nothing could proceed at the usual pace. That's sleep paralysis, isn't it? And so that's quite a common phenomenon, particularly with nightmares. You're half awake and you can't actually move, and so that can be very frightening actually as well. I think it is always frightening actually when you get sleep paralysis. It's not pleasant, is it? I think we've all experienced it at some point. If you haven't, you're lucky, because it's not very nice, but you can normally have a nightmare and you just can't move. So this is actually playing on a common experience and a common form of nightmare and a common horror actually, isn't it? Then she talks about the gaslight I'd left lit for Jonathan, but turned and came only like a tiny red spark through the fog, which had evidently grown thicker and poured into the room. So she thinks it's a dream, but actually this was reality. So it's presented as a dream, and again, but it's good for liminal spaces here as well. Then there's also, I suppose, there's a boundary being crossed because Dracula is also crossing into the intimate personal space of Jonathan Harker as husband and wife as well. This is the bedroom that they're sleeping in together, so it's crossing over a boundary there as well. And there's more sleep paralysis here as well. And you could talk, again, I've got to be careful, YouTube, but you could argue there is a sexual analogue going on here as well. But I can't say too much more because of YouTube. It is wonderful that what tricks our dreams play us and how conveniently we can imagine. So rationally, Mina is dismissing it as a dream, but again, dramatic irony here, reader knows that it's actually reality. It got thicker and thicker till it seemed as if it became concentrated into a sort of pillar of cloud in the room, through the top of which I could see the light of a gas shining like a red eye. And of course, if you watched my full opening sequence, you would have seen that I'd used Hollywood level special effects to create a similar effect of Dracula pouring in and turning into a column of mist, and with the red eyes peering through it. So again, I hope I didn't terrify you with those incredible Hollywood level graphics that I used at the start. So she's being visited by Dracula here, of course. He's like an evil Santa. No, it's not an evil Santa. Don't write that. But it's an evil, unwelcome nighttime. No, let's say this better. An evil, unwelcome nocturnal visitation. That sounds better, doesn't it? And then she's wakes up the next day and feels very, terribly weak and spiritless. So just like Lucy was, who you were sad about earlier, Mina. And that's the end of that chapter. It's quite a short one, really. Well, I hope you enjoyed that and found it useful. I could pass on the contact details of the Hollywood special effects house that I employed for the start of the video, if you're interested. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that. Have a good day or night. Enjoy whatever you're doing, and good luck in all your endeavours. Goodbye.